Ali Sherlock did not arrive in the public eye through a carefully planned debut or a traditional music industry pathway. Her story unfolded quietly, almost accidentally, shaped by moments of personal struggle long before global attention ever found her. When people first encountered her voice on the streets of Dublin, what struck them was not polish or performance technique, but sincerity. There was a calm weight in her singing that suggested lived experience rather than imitation. This sense of emotional depth became the foundation of her public identity, yet it was rooted in circumstances that most listeners never fully understood. Ali's journey cannot be explained through viral success alone. To understand how her career evolved, it is necessary to look beyond the applause and explore the formative experiences that shaped her relationship with music, resilience, and visibility. Her rise was not driven by ambition in the traditional sense. Instead, it emerged from a need to express emotions that had no other outlet. That distinction would later play a critical role in how she navigated fame, pressure, and the difficult process of growing up under constant observation. Born and raised in Dublin, Ali Sherlock's early childhood was marked by a profound loss that quietly shaped her emotional world. When she was just 9 years old, her mother passed away, leaving a gap that words could not easily fill. For a child still learning how to process complex emotions, grief became a constant but silent presence. Unlike adults, children often lack the language to articulate loss, and Ali was no exception. Rather than expressing sadness openly, she internalized it. Music gradually became the space where those feelings could exist without explanation or judgment. Singing allowed her to communicate what she could not say aloud. This connection to music was not about attention or performance. It was about survival and emotional regulation. Her father, Mark Sherlock, noticed this instinctively and supported her exploration of music as a personal refuge rather than a career goal. At this stage, music was not a pathway to recognition. It was a way to cope with an absence that had reshaped her world far too early. Ali's relationship with music developed organically, without formal instruction or structured training. She taught herself guitar using online tutorials, practicing for hours in solitude. While other children followed predictable routines of school and social activities, Ali spent much of her time immersed in sound and repetition. This isolation was not only emotional, but also physical. Ongoing respiratory issues caused her to miss significant periods of school, further distancing her from peers her age. Eventually, homeschooling became necessary to protect her health. Although this decision supported her physical well-being, it intensified her sense of separation from everyday childhood experiences. Music filled the spaces left by illness, absence, and grief. Each song became both a distraction and a form of emotional processing. Observers later described her voice as unusually mature, but that maturity was not learned through technique. It was shaped by circumstance. Long before audiences connected with her music, Ali was already using it as a private language for understanding loss, loneliness, and endurance. This emotional foundation explains why Ali's performances resonated so deeply when they eventually reached a wider audience. When she sang songs about loss, memory, or longing, listeners sensed an authenticity that felt instinctive rather than rehearsed. Her interpretations of emotionally heavy songs stood out not because they were technically flawless, but because they carried genuine emotional understanding. Grief was not something she performed, it was something she lived with. By the time she began performing publicly, Ali had already learned how to stand alone with her emotions, without expectation of sympathy or validation. This self-reliance would later help her manage public attention, but it also meant she rarely sought support when pressure intensified. From the very beginning, her journey was shaped less by innocence and more by early emotional responsibility. This quiet resilience became both her strength and her vulnerability as her music transitioned from a personal refuge to a shared experience with the world. Grafton Street in Dublin became the setting where Ali's private relationship with music slowly transformed into a public one. Initially, street performing offered her a sense of peace rather than exposure. Surrounded by everyday movement and ambient noise, she found comfort in singing without expectation. At just 12 years old, she stood with a guitar and sang songs that reflected emotional depth far beyond her age. People stopped not because she demanded attention, but because her presence felt sincere. There was no theatricality or attempt to impress. Her performances were quiet, grounded, and emotionally transparent. For Ali, the street was not a stage in the traditional sense. It was a place where music could exist naturally, without pressure or obligation. This environment allowed her to connect with listeners in a way that felt honest and unfiltered, reinforcing the emotional bond she had already formed with music long before an audience ever appeared. The turning point came unexpectedly when a simple video of Ali singing was recorded and shared online. The clip was unpolished and unplanned, capturing a moment rather than a performance. Within weeks, it spread far beyond Dublin, reaching millions of viewers around the world. Audiences were struck by the contrast between her age and the emotional weight of her voice. Comments described her as rare, authentic, and unusually moving. Media outlets quickly followed, framing her as a natural talent discovered outside the traditional music industry. While the internet celebrated her, Ali herself struggled to understand the scale of what was happening. She was still a child navigating school, health challenges, and unresolved grief. Suddenly, strangers felt connected to her voice and formed expectations about who she was. The attention transformed Grafton Street from a refuge into a focal point, altering the meaning of every performance that followed. As her videos gained traction, the atmosphere around her street performances began to change. Crowds grew larger, and phones appeared more frequently. People no longer listened quietly. They documented. What once felt intimate now carried an unspoken demand for emotional repetition. Listeners wanted to feel again what they had felt the first time they encountered her online. Ali became aware of this shift almost immediately. Singing was no longer entirely free. It was observed, recorded, and anticipated. Despite this, she continued returning to the street because it represented her original connection to music. She was not seeking attention. She was seeking grounding. However, the line between personal expression and public expectation had already been crossed. Her private coping mechanism had become a public narrative. Once that transformation occurs, it becomes difficult to reverse. The street that once allowed her to heal had quietly become a place where she was expected to deliver emotional impact on demand. This early exposure set the stage for a much larger transition that would soon follow. Viral recognition brought opportunities that moved faster than Ali could emotionally process. Interviews, invitations, and international attention arrived in quick succession. While these developments were presented publicly as milestones of success, they carried a hidden cost. Ali was still developing her sense of identity, navigating grief, and managing health challenges. The sudden expansion of her audience removed the protective distance she once had. Music was no longer just an internal refuge or a local exchange. It had become a global conversation. The foundations of her career were built on authenticity, but maintaining that authenticity under increasing scrutiny would prove challenging. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where talent and vulnerability would be tested by visibility, expectation, and the realities of growing up in the spotlight. As Ali Sherlock's visibility grew beyond the streets of Dublin, her world began to change in ways that were not immediately obvious. International television appearances and global exposure introduced her to a professional music environment far removed from the freedom of street performing. While audiences praised her confidence, the reality behind the scenes was far more overwhelming. Structured stages, permanent recordings, and constant evaluation replaced the spontaneous connection she once felt with music. Returning home did not restore balance. Grafton Street, once a place of emotional grounding, became crowded and demanding. Performances were no longer moments of expression, but events shaped by expectation. Singing began to feel observed rather than shared. Social media intensified this pressure. Alongside encouragement came constant scrutiny, dissecting her voice, growth, and artistic choices. For a teenager still forming her identity, this environment proved emotionally exhausting. Music gradually shifted from a refuge into a responsibility. Ali worked harder than ever, refining her skills and pushing herself to meet expectations she never consciously chose. At the same time, her personal life narrowed. Normal teenage experiences became limited as schedules, travel, and public attention consumed her time. Fame did not silence her voice, but it slowly drained her sense of peace. Seeking control over her narrative, Allie transitioned into original music. Writing her own songs marked an important step toward self-definition, but it also exposed her to new criticism. While some fans supported her evolution, others resisted change. The mixed response deepened her self-doubt. Studio work, collaboration, and creative pressure led to emotional fatigue. Gradually, her public presence slowed. There were no announcements or explanations. She simply stepped back. This pause was not a collapse, but a necessary retreat. When Allie returned, she did so quietly and intentionally. She set boundaries, became selective, and reconnected with music on her own terms. Street performances remained a grounding force, while professional projects continued at a healthier pace. Her story ultimately became less about viral success and more about survival, balance, and self-preservation. Stepping away did not end her career. It reshaped it.